Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I just wanted to talk for a little bit about probably one of the more fascinating opportunities I had to sit and chat with someone who had such a finger on the pulse of history and of the public, and that was Walter Cronkite. And I got to meet him in January of 2000. We sat down and we did some recording, had some conversations, talked about history and the like. Um, when I came to do it, we were going to make a recording of his voice to be permanently preserved, and what was really interesting, of course, I came with the mayor and with a whole team of people, politicians, two camera crews, and there was also, in the middle of all that, another camera crew that came in to film some other stuff. So it was a very busy, busy day. And so as we sat down and talked, we wondered about the things that he had done. And, I asked him about his beginnings in the broadcast industry. And he said, I studied print journalism. He said there wasn't anything else. Because broadcasting was basically new. It had started in the 1920 basically, and when he was going to college in the 1930s, it was still a relatively new thing, and he found himself in CBS, and under the tutelage of Edward R. Murrow and Eric Severai and a whole bunch of really great people. And he had a lot to say about those early days. It was fascinating because you kind of just went at it without any set script. A lot of times you kind of did everything by the seat of your pants. He did all kinds of stuff going all the way back to the 1930s. In a sense, he was the voice of the 20th century. And what was remarkable about Walter Cronkite is that he went on bombing missions during World War II. He was involved in covering Korea, Vietnam. In fact, the old story was, if Walter Cronkite's against Vietnam, it's over, and he was against it. But he had interviewed everybody. We talked about all kinds of different people and what they were like, and also the fact is that I asked him, like we were talking about history and people who were involved in history and affected it, and we were talking about Theodore Roosevelt. I played a recording of Theodore Roosevelt for him, and he said his voice is quite high, and he said it could very well be because he was yelling all the time. And he said, I remember what Cronkite said. He said, I remember in World War II listening to Patton, and his voice was very high, and he was always yelling and screaming. And he said it wasn't this deep voice, it was very high, and it carried, and that could be something to it. But he interviewed everybody. He was involved in interviewing various presidents over the years. He was very, very instrumental and supportive, and sometimes a great critic, as he mentioned, with the space program. The entire world was watching him when he announced to the world we had landed on the moon. And I believe it was said by somebody there that they said your voice was translated into every language on earth. And he said, how did they translate wow? I thought that was pretty cool. But we talked about, music and entertainment. He told me when he was a kid, his grandparents had Edison phonographs. However, his parents had Victor phonographs. He said they were a little bit more modern. And he said it didn't matter where I was, either my grandparents or my parents, it was my job to wind up the machines. And so when I brought this old wind-up phonograph, he was excited. He said, I know everything about these things. They're a lot of fun. And we talked about other people, and we talked about that frightening day when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And he told me a lot of interesting stories that I thought was kind of fascinating. He said when we first got the messages, he said we were all in our shirt sleeves. We were doing work and whatever, and the news came up. Now, none of the cameras were on, but the cameras just didn't turn on. They took a while to warm up. And so when they got that from the teletype, and phone calls, I gather, what happened is they could do a audio message on television. That's all they could do. And he said they did a couple of those with the cameras still warming up. And then finally, they said they were all running around like crazy. He said they finally got the camera up, and he sat there and he started talking, and he said, he started talking about the attempted assassination at the time, and finally, when it became official that the President of the United States was dead. And he did that symbolic thing where he took off his glasses and stuff, and it's all iconic in the history of television, in the history of broadcasting. And he said after they finished, they realized that they were so busy running around, so frantic, he had forgot to put his jacket on. And he had done a broadcast just in a shirt. And so he became the first newscaster on CBS to ever be on television without wearing a jacket. I know it sounds like nothing today, but in those days there was a strict decorum. But all was forgiven because nothing made sense that day. But it's just an interesting thing that they couldn't, just jump right on television. They had to wait for the cameras to warm up. Of course, with space, he was really kind of involved and fascinated with, and so many different other things. But what was kind of fun, that when we were doing the interviews and everything else, we had an Edison phonograph set up, and we're going to play some music, and he said, let's have some Edison entertainment. And I put on a recording of By the Light of the Silvery Moon, and he started to dance, and we had a sing-along, and it was a delightful thing. I had a lot of fun talking with him and enjoying his company, and he even did something really remarkable. He was an amazing gentleman. He really was. He lived up in Martha's Vineyard at times, and he had his yacht that he used to go out and have a good time on. He enjoyed his cocktails at times. But he answered a lot of questions, and he wrote me a letter of basically thanking me, and a letter of recommendation in a sense. I've always thought about it. People talk about getting the Walter Cronkite Award. I got the letter from Walter Cronkite. I kind of like that. And he just wrote good wishes and pleasure. Thank you. He always, Mr. Stanley. He was very, very much gentleman. He was an absolute icon in his field. And he was indeed the voice of the 20th century. And one of the greatest honors of my life was to spend some time with him and talk with him. And just something I wanted to share. He was truly a remarkable, fascinating man. Thank you.